Hi, John. How are you this week?
I'm good, Elliot. How you been?
I've been good. The weather here in Wisconsin has been beautiful, very late summer, early fall weather in the 70s with sunny days and light breezes. So um, we could use some rain, but I'm happy not to be in the 90s as a lot of people are around the country. So it's been good.
Yeah, it's good. And I don't have his name in front of me, but Marquette just got a recruit that chose Marquette over a bunch of other schools. So he will be joining the team in the 23 season. So that's exciting. It's always good to know that people are continuing to look closely at Marquette's basketball program. So I'm always excited about that.
That's true. That is good. There'll be another interesting. It'll be another interesting season, and we're starting to work our way into the Shaka Smart era where where he's managing the recruiting. So that'll be a lot of fun to watch.
So I think we asked people who listen, hopefully regularly, to This Week in AML if they would like updates on Marquette basketball once a month. We'd be happy to provide it in the front end of this short podcast.
That's
Yeah,
right. So now
yeah.
now on to something in addition to basketball. Um, so there's a website called Lawfare, which I think you're familiar with, and they post interesting articles by interesting authors in a lot of national security and other related topics. And recently there was an article, and the title is Cutting Off Financing for the Next Capitol Insurrection. Did you happen to see that article?
Right. And just to let folks know, Lawfare has been around since 2010, and it's produced in cooperation with the Brookings Institute, but it's on national and international security issues. So this particular article that came across, I came across my view, I think on LinkedIn is where I saw it. But yeah, I did see it. And two things I'd mentioned before we talk about the substance. The authors is two authors. One is former strategic intelligence analyst with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and she's written actually a book on illicit money, and the other is a researcher who's worked with and been an officer with the Egmont Group of FIU. So both of these folks have international credentials, and as we looked at the piece, it was their take on preventing the financing of the next insurrection. Even though it's a broader discussion, they talk about some of the things that we've learned from January 6th, 2021. And a couple of things that I didn't know. One is that the cost of everything was about $500,000, which is more than 9/11. So their point is that from legal fees to staging events to continued recruitment, all of this, it's not a low cost attack. And the costs are distributed across many participants and donors. So I thought that was interesting. So the study or the research document looks at open source material reporting, some primary documents, but the dollar amount I thought was particularly compelling, but also I guess the B part of this is some of the methods in which and how things get financed, crowdfunding, unfortunately, misuse of charities, some utilization of payment processing, and all of that. So there's definitely a lot to unpack, and they give you a number of recommendations. And then I'll stop after this. The other part of it I thought was really fascinating is in sort of the overview on the page under the title is links to a number of other research documents that support their both their theories and their recommendations.
Yes. So I all the things you mentioned caught my eye. And I fully agree with you. There is a lot to unpack. Oftentimes, I will take a look at an article that either you point out to me or I end up pointing out to you and maybe read it a second time. This was a 3-read minimum.
Right. Right.
given the complexity and the depth of what was going on in here. And I want to jump to the recommendations because it wasn't what I was expecting when I saw the headline and started my first read through. And that is that even though the focus is domestic terrorism, there's recognition that many of the groups that are involved in the US, for example, have affiliates in a lot of cases with similar names in other countries. So one of the key recommendations that the authors put forth is the importance of international cooperation among the various jurisdictions where these affiliated organizations are operating, because they're operating more in a more connected manner than we might think if we only focused on the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers or the Three Percenters in the US. There are affiliates in Canada, for example, and in other jurisdictions that are operating more connected than less, I guess I would say.
Yeah, and the Soufan Center, one of the authors is works at the Soufan Center, but the Soufan Center has a number of the issue briefs, and I think one of these that are listed in the embedded document. I think we actually have talked about this before, and this is an issue brief on lessons learned from listing violent far-right extremist groups in Canada. I know we mentioned it when they were listed, but one of the things that they talk about regarding Canada builds on what you just said. They say in those recommendations, Canada should work with the partner countries to coordinate with the designation and listing of entities. They should share information. So again, because unfortunately these terrorists are, some are working in multinational situations. The other thing I thought was interesting is that they said there should be metrics so you can figure out the impact of sanctions and designations. What does it really do? And that's been an ongoing conversation that our community has had regarding Russia, the response to Ukraine. And a lot of publications have looked at that. Some saying sanctions are definitely work immediately. Some say it takes time. But the one I wanted to just reference is, again, this is a July 2022 issue brief on Canada. And I'll just read it because it's interesting for our financial institution clients. It says, when financial entities in Canada continue to provide financial services to listed terrorist entities. Now, of course, we wouldn't imagine anybody would be doing that intentionally, but when they continue to do it, or websites that provide services, Canadian law enforcement should liaise with the companies in question. Okay, great, talk to them, find out, but then consider terrorist financing criminal charges, and if or when those services are disrupted, issue a public statement to encourage greater adoption and compliance with the law. So the premise challenges the fact that I don't believe, for the most part, institutions intentionally do any of that. I think we've been doing this long enough to know that that's not the case, but that's a pretty strong recommendation coming from this group.
I agree. I think I fully agree with you that with a couple of limited exceptions, over the many years you and I have been doing this, there's no question that the financial services community have been active participants in attempting to build structures and make them work to cut down on terrorist financing and money laundering as well. However, there are some organizations who, not because they're supportive of them, but because of resources or sophistication,
right,
or other resource challenges, may not be necessarily up to the challenge. And the other challenge we know we have is that, to the extent that standard payment systems, whether they be credit cards or debit cards or other payment streams, that are and payment processors, the volumes of transactions are so high that picking, often designing your systems and picking ways to be certain that you're identifying the ones you want to interdict is challenging. I mean, this is if this were easy, you and I wouldn't have a podcast, about it.
Right. So I think the key conclusion is what you've again already said, and I referenced in the Canadian issue brief, and that is international response. It needs to criminalize this extremist violence, and they call out specifically the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, and they believe that they should be, as they are in Canada, designated as terrorist groups. And I know there'll be debate about that, which we'll continue to talk about in future conversations. But that'll help them better coordinate. And they want to talk about coordinating in Canada, New Zealand, and other countries that are working hard to combat violent far-right extremism. But the bottom line is cooperation, transparency in how you're making the designations, metrics so you can figure out how these things work. And then again, working together, collaborating is the key. So really interesting. Lawfare, the website is lawfareblog.com.
We'll link to the article in our thing on our website, so you'll be able to see what we saw and follow this thread if you're interested. And then, of course, Lawfare as a website has other interesting material that we would certainly recommend people keep track of.
Right, and the authors, I didn't mention them up front by name, Jessica Davis and Elena Martinova. I hope I got the last name right. Those are the co-authors of the piece, and it was just posted this week.
Yes. So, John, what do you got in the hopper?
We had an interview this week with a BSA official from Silicon Valley Bank on the Women in AML series that we've been working on for a couple of years. So we're going to be working on that. As we mentioned, I think last week, we have a couple of other ones that haven't been posted yet. One actually got posted today as we're recording, and that's a new book on countering the financing of terrorism by the American Bar Association. So we were able to talk to the author and editor of that. And then Guy Fico, the deputy director of IRSCI. We had a conversation with him, and that'll get posted coming up in a week or so. We have working on some webinars. We're still figuring out the panelists, but maybe you can tell them about the one we're having for September.
So September, we're looking at how ESG issues influence or have been, but really need to influence risk analysis and risk management for financial services companies, not just directly on the ESG, but also because they can be connected to financial crime. There's a little bit of a European focus there, but I think that our listeners and webinar participants across the globe will find it interesting, since this is an issue that is getting more and more scrutiny by both financial services regulators, but also public company regulators. And usually what happens in the public company sphere quickly moves into the private company sphere. So I think that will be interesting for everybody. And that is Thursday, September 29th, a new time. It'll be noon Eastern time, so that we can accommodate a broader global audience. And we hope you'll tune in for that. You can sign up and get the access link on our website.
That sounds great. Elliot, have a good rest of your week. We'll talk again next week.
Okay. Thanks, John. Bye-bye.
Bye.